like mathematics, in fact, you can always start an argument by assuming something, and then the conclusions follow by valid argument from the assumptions.
We're talking about sort of inductive reasoning or empirical justification.
Yes.
Now, the point behind all of this is not to say that, I mean, part of the point is not merely to say this is the way one should view knowledge if one wants knowledge for a basis for action. Other philosophers might agree, but they would want more for knowledge. Knowledge would have to be a stronger view than that. And to counter that stronger view, he sometimes talks that we can't get certainty, and the Cartesian arguments for getting certainty don't actually support the conclusion that some philosophers thought it does. So it was a picture of how knowledge could and justification could go on. It was a claim that other pictures not merely are not needed, but they can't be, for a variety of reasons, maintained, and therefore it turned out that very people identify Peirce with some theory of fallibilism. Everything is revisable, there's nothing fixed, etc.
Now this introduction of the term fallibilism is very important. And indeed, Peirce was a pioneer of the whole idea, and it was a revolutionary idea in its day. Until and including, I think, virtually the whole of the 19th century, Western man regarded science as a secure and copper-bottomed and safe and sure and unchanging body of knowledge. The scientific knowledge was certain knowledge, and it was, for that reason, incorrigible, unchanging. Peirce introduced, and was one of the very first people, if not the first person to introduce, the notion that this is not so, that all science is corrigible, all science is fallible, that we use scientific theories for as long as they work, but we must be prepared to replace them if we come up against difficulties with them. Now that's an orthodoxy in the 20th century. All scientists take that view in our time, but they certainly didn't in Peirce's time.
Currently, lots of people take this view of fallibilism sort of as an aim of science, that science shouldn't aim as a complete theory, that one should never say, I've got it now, I've just got it. But science, by definition, is open to perpetual revolution. Now, that is a thesis which sometimes is associated with fallibilism, which I'm not sure quite what to say about, but it's a different...
Well, let's not go into that now. Let's not go into that.
But when it comes to science, one gets a different picture from Peirce. The picture is a scientist entering into a community. He's part of a community of investigation, of investigators. Truth, if you wish, is a sort of a property of the community in a sense which I'll try to specify. The actual scientist is not there as an individual. He's sort of understood primarily as a member of the group. And then we can talk about inquiry in general. And there,
as a group activity and as an institutionalized
right, you enter into an institution which is rational and reasonable.
Yes.
And then one engages in inquiry. And Peirce has lots of things to say about the stages of inquiry, as for example, the inductive phase, when hypotheses are put up to test, and the reasons for accepting them as testable. Deductive phase, when the consequences are noted, and the inductive phase, when the actual results are assessed. And he has a great deal to say about all of these things, for which he may be credited as a forerunner of diverse kinds of people, like Nagel or Popper, who have differences among them, but would all claim that this is along the lines that he has suggested. So we have this picture of science, and part of Peirce's later motivation is to try to see what justification he can give for someone entering into this kind of a community. But now, given this view of science, and also the view that if one wants to say that science captures the real, or what's out there, one has to sort of take it this way, because whatever the real is, or whatever we think is out there independently of us, one can't actually think that it's only accessible to an individual person. The real should be accessible to the community. It's independent of any particular agent. And now the agent and the inquiry, well, what's its goal? And here one has two aspects of Peirce. One aspect is, well, what sense could we give for truth in this particular context? After all, we very frequently think of each individual belief may be wrong, even though I think it's true, it may be wrong, and this way, what sort of guarantee, if you like the word, of truth is there? What concept can we give to truth? And he tries to develop the notion that when we say a given belief is true, what we have in mind is that this opinion actually will survive and be embedded into the final body of science, if that is a correct way of talking.
Now, up to this point, we've been talking almost entirely about Peirce, and I want to bring James more centrally into the picture now. It was William James, although it was Peirce who coined the philosophical term pragmatism, it was actually James who made the term generally known among educated people at large, and this was done primarily by his book, indeed the title of his book, Pragmatism, which was published in 1907, wasn't it? Now, what were some of the main themes of this book?
Well, the book is a very rich book, and it contains a number of diverse and interconnected theses. First, it's a critique of certain kinds of philosophical positions on the ground that they were not really relevant to the problems of their generation, primarily the conflict between science and religion, which was one of the things he and his contemporaries wrestled with for a long time. Secondly, he criticizes some, but not all, of the philosophical theses are not being sort of pragmatically different. I don't think he ever proves the case, but he sort of tries to...
When you say pragmatically different, what you mean is that there were a number of apparently alternative philosophies, which were only apparently alternative, because when you actually examined them, you found that there was no specific evidence or even possible experience which could differentiate between them. And therefore, cognitively, they were equivalent.
One of the things, yes, is he said that way. And secondly, he frequently also thought that they were not really different as far as basing a particular kind of decision as to how to live.
They made no difference for purposes of action.
In that particular sense. Now, this, whether or not he proves this is an interesting thing, but I'm not sure he does, but this is the kind of theme that he tries to introduce. The second kind of theme that he tries to introduce is that one looks at a lot of these traditional metaphysical pictures, one should sort of look at them as pictures, and that his own view is, of a lot of the metaphysics, even his own, is sort of one which is based not merely on the evidence, but in terms of sort of bias for looking for certain kinds of things, certain personal preferences, and he gives his own, and he asks his other colleagues to do so as well. Well, the whole notion of a picture and how one justifies or looks a philosophical thing, or some, once again, just some.
Yeah.
The reason I'm hesitating is because the book is dedicated to John Stuart Mill, and he's not sort of saying pragmatism comes in and it's completely novel. As a matter of fact,
and all other philosophy goes out of the window. He's not saying that. He's saying it's a continuation of some already familiar modes of thinking.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that he introduces, for which he's been actually both criticized and lauded, is his approach to knowledge, conceptual schemes, and truth. And that he also deals with them in other books, but this is central things in this particular book.
Now, I'd like us to take up the last of those, because only a moment ago you were giving us quite a long but very interesting exposition of Peirce's theories of meaning and of truth. How did James's conception of meaning and of truth differ from Peirce's?
Well, he starts with how our knowledge evolves and how our conceptual schemes evolve, and emphasizes that very often we have evolving conceptual schemes, and one really can't ask whether this conceptual scheme or that conceptual scheme is actually better or worse. One has to judge between conceptual schemes in terms of the particular use to which they're put. Now, that's one particular thing, the sort of pragmatic justification, not of the notion of truth, but the notion of conceptual scheme. There's also a deeper thing as to whether or not he actually wants to say, and he does want to say, that we can't give an account of our conceptual schemes as sort of merely statements about how the world is independent of us. The way we classify the world is actually constitutive of what we think the world is. We're sort of always thinking from within with our conceptual scheme.